Welcome. Welcome, everyone. It's Angelo Robles, and welcome to the Angelo Robles podcast and at Family Office. We are early, but never too early in 2026 to talk about one of my favorite subjects and have one of my favorite guests who we've had on multiple times. Hopefully, we'll butt heads a little bit because I think you all expect that a little bit from me now. Let's see where it goes. How about this title? Abolish, Extract, or Escape? A sovereign strategist guide to really the now, 2026 through the near future, 2028, what I'm going to define as a chaos window. Now, we have a very special guest. I could certainly make the point. He's going to be too modest and humble. But when I think of billionaires, decabillionaires, no matter where they are in the world, US or non US, and they want to understand sovereign strategy, tax implications, geopolitical risk, well, there's one name that I would call, and it happens to be our special guest today, David Lesperance, founder of Lesperance and Associates, prominent attorney in the space, critical thinker, and one of my favorite guests. David, it's great to see you again.
Great to see you. We're certainly living in interesting times, so I'm looking forward to an interesting discussion.
For sure. And if I may ask, I know we'll get into Canada, which, by the way, is David's birth home. And I think there are things important to discuss on that. But where in the world are you now?
Today, I am in Gdynia, Poland, and tomorrow evening, I start a flight to go to Koh Samui, Thailand, going through Abu Dhabi for 2 weeks.
Oh, David, we have so much to talk about. So, on that note, welcome everyone, and let's begin. I'm going to start here in the US, California. The California wealth tax, at least as a ballot initiative. I think direct democracy bypassing legislative checks. Walk us through a little bit of this tax, why it's unique, effectively taxing unrealized capital gains for billionaires. And I know, never forget, 99% of people rather hurt the rich than help the poor. That's just the way it is. David, we have a lot to unpack on this one. I'll let you give context behind it and let's get into it.
Sure. So in late October, one of the Union of Medical Workers put forth a proposal in California to tax unrealized gains, so that you start Angelo AI Inc. for $1. It's now trading at whatever in the secondary market, or if you've gone public in the public markets. They've said we want to tax 5%, and we'll talk about 5% of what, of that one-time tax. That came out in October. I notified clients of that. They said, well, what does this mean? I said, well, you need to you need to dig into this bill a bit, proposal, and you need to determine what's going to be the damage to your fiscal house if this passes. And so we'll talk about 5% of what? Well, they thought they would get cute, and they originally were talking about 5% of the day they introduced it, and then they said, well, that's getting a little ambitious, so we'll go as 5% of what your net worth is as of January 1st of 2026. We'll also talk about whether that retroactivity is enforceable, but let's say that that's what they did. Coming back after Thanksgiving, they ran the numbers and gave me a call. I thought the day before Thanksgiving, the Chancellor of the Exchequer in the UK dropped her budget. I thought there'd be an exit tax. There wasn't, so I thought, oh, I'm going to have a quiet holiday. But came back, these billionaires said, we've looked at this, and first off, it is 5% not of our equity, but of our ownership and control, whichever is the larger. And what is quite common in Silicon Valley, from everything from Alphabet to Meta to most startups, is that the founders will have a second class of shares, it's pref shares or B shares, where they have voting control, even though they will dilute their equity as they go through different rounds of funding. Well, so it's going to be, if we think of the equation of tax as X, which is what you're being taxed on, times the rate, which they're proposing 5%, equals Z, or for our Canadian and British, Z, which is the amount paid. That's the big significant number. Well, if it's of equity, 5 times equity is what that number, but if it's of your going to be, if you have 100% of the control shares, that's 100% of the company. That is a huge number. So the presumption that they had was that, these founders were like Scrooge McDuck, that they had a whole bunch of gold coins in their basement they were skiing on. Well, they don't. There's a liquidity issue, but there's a bad enough liquidity issue if it's 5% of your equity that you're sucking out of this company. But when you're talking about 5% of your control shares, you're basically, emptying the company, which is completely devastating. They then put a couple of other cute little things in there, which is, how do you determine the value? Okay, is it EBITDA times what multiple? So how big is that value if it's not publicly traded? If it's publicly traded, fire up the Bloomberg and what did it close at? But when you're talking about these, you've got to get valuations. Well, the California Franchise Board is the ones determining this. They've said, well, if the appraiser doesn't give what we feel is a reasonable estimate, we're going to apply a 4% penalty against the appraiser. So now the appraisers are saying, we either want insurance or we're not going to take this case. So it's very difficult. So what happened was, my existing clients came back and said, right, we don't even want to play this game. We're going to get out by January 1st. And so I had 4 multi-billionaire clients who we said, we need to get out by January 1st. And they did. And, there were some, well, it's difficult. You have to remember, at this stage of wealth, they all have family offices. So my char first off was, you have homes in multiple states. Which ones can you sell at the breakfast table that the family can live? You may love Wyoming, but is that where you want to spend non-season in and stuff? And some clients do. And so these 4 clients, 3 of them ended up going to Florida and one of them went to Texas, but it's completely up to the client's choice. They weren't about to go to New York because that would be jumping out of the California tax pot and into the New York tax fire. So they went to states where they could live and where they felt reasonably comfortable that there wasn't going to be a state level taxation or a move to have a similar move as the California wealth tax.
Okay, I got multiple questions on that. Audience, a little bit of a heads up. And as some of you know me by now, this will, of course, be a 2-hour discussion. I have a lot of questions and I'm curious. We're going to spend some more time on this. We have so many subjects to cover. I promise you, there's going to be something for you that you're going to get tremendous value at. So walk us through a little bit. It was on some sort of ballot to see if it wants to progress this past November. If you're a California resident, and they're going to be very aggressive going after people that tried, like some of your people, to go to a different state. But if you're there as of 1/1 of this past year, it's going to be retroactive. It's on the ballot for November of 2026. What does it take to pass? Does it just take one more vote, then a break even 50-50? If that's the case, what did I say earlier? People are, of course, going to vote for this.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm constantly asked by clients, what do you think is going to happen? Well, and quite frankly, in today's environment, I don't know what next Monday's headlines are going to be, let alone what the midterms are going to be or the November 2026. So
all things you're getting into, folks.
Yeah, so I tell clients, what do you think the odds are of the path? The poly markets are saying it's 50-50. But let's say it's a 10% chance. Okay, what the damage is to your fiscal house if this passes. It's a 10% chance. And if there was, so what's the Premium. What's the fire insurance fire escape plan? Well, for moving for states, the premium isn't that high, and the damage. So if there was that much risk to your 10% risk to your house for this kind of damage, would you get fire insurance and a fire escape plan? And all these clients did the math and concluded, yeah, we are out of here. And so they left. Now we're now getting the next round of clients who are saying, Dave, I didn't leave by January 1st. Well, the first thing is, let's look at your situation. Can we make an argument that in that inevitable audit in a few years that you did leave? It's not like you had to have absolutely everything and, have left, but can we make an argument that you have changed your domicile? We're dealing with domicile, which is not a bright line test. It's more of a subjective test. So can we bolster the things that you've done already and your actions since from today until that audit to be able to win that audit or comfortably win that audit? That's defense number one. Defense number two is, can they actually make it legally retroactive to January 1st
Right.
if they're not voting until November? That is a good argument that they cannot. So let's make sure that we at least have a solid argument that you've left prior to November or even December 31st of 2026. The next argument is a constitutional argument. Is it constitutional to tax unrealized capital gains? Now, this is an interesting discussion. When Elizabeth Warren in 2016 was going through the primaries and came out with what she called her ultra-millionaire tax, we looked at this, and I was on a number of calls, and I had a client who was considering expatriating because they felt the tax the rich wildfire was kind of getting out of hand and they wanted to leave. And there was a tax lawyer on there and says, oh, it's completely unconstitutional. And my client said, and how many years of wealth tax am I going to pay before SCOTUS agrees with you, Supreme Court? And he ended up expatriating. Elizabeth Warren didn't win the primary, and Donald Trump ended up winning that election. But we're now back again. So the other interesting thing along with California is, what does this mean? There are a number of other states that are talking about doing this, that are watching this experiment. Illinois, the Chicago mayor is talking about it. Washington is talking about bringing in tax. Rhode Island, we don't know what Mandami is going to do. It's a week and a half since his inauguration. I've already had my first client kind of talk about getting fire insurance and a fire escape plan and see what he proposes. But the California wealth tax, when you run through the numbers, it's existential. So the big question for a lot of clients, for a lot of policymakers and the media, et cetera, is who's going to leave? And this is, as Yogi Berra once said, deja vu all over again. I went through this a year and a half ago with the UK when they said, well, we're going to get rid of the remittance basis and we're going to tax those ultra high net worth people, not just on their UK situs assets for inheritance tax, but on their global assets. And I always like putting in Newtonian principles. So the wealthier a person is, the less inertia, the less they need to be in a specific location to make and maintain their wealth and their lifestyle. So what is the force? Well, if you say in the UK to these ultra high net worth people, well, I had a client who said, okay, Dave, what does this mean? And I said, well, they're going to move income tax from a territorial to a global basis. I don't generate income. Capital gains, territorial to a global basis. I don't sell things, I borrow against it. And inheritance tax, 40%, not just on your UK situs, but on worldwide assets. To which his response was, London's nice. It isn't that nice. And likewise, these clients in California said, California is nice. It isn't that nice. And it's not like they can't come back ever. It's just that they need to move their domicile to another location. And they have to behave when they do come back. I'm going for a specific Lakers game. I'm going for a board meeting. I'm going to a funeral or a wedding. I'm going in, I'm staying as a visitor to California would be, not in a home I own, but in a hotel. Those types of things. So their behavior matches the argument that they are no longer domiciled in the jurisdiction in which they're leaving. And in the UK, you had to be, oh, there's no people like London. They'll never leave. It's the greatest place on earth. Vast majorities of them left. In California, it's the same thing. And then you see, they're hanging on. So Jensen Huang said, oh, I'm not going to leave. I just happened to finish a biography on Jensen Huang. Jensen Huang is an engineer of a certain mindset. My father was an engineer. I know this mindset. He's not focused on anything else but making AI and chips for AI in the future. He probably doesn't know whether his car has got gas in it or is fully charged, or what the price of eggs are, or anything. He's focused on this. So when somebody says, what about this? Whatever, I'll pay whatever. I'm focused on this. And you can say, okay, he's going to stay. There may be other people who say, I love California, or I want to be a patriotic millionaire. I'm going to stay. That's fine. And that's their choice. But the people who inertia force is tremendous have left. Let's look at the ones we publicly know about. Sergey Brin, Larry Page, Larry Ellison, Peter Thiel. Jensen Huang is worth $163 billion. Those four people combined, that's excluding my clients and people like David Sachs and other billionaires, that is $575 billion that is gone out of California. So pure math, whether you think it's fair or not, the top 38% or the top 1% in California contribute 38% of the revenue. It's just the way progressive tax revenue model works. The top 0.001%, which is the group we're talking about here, they're super golden geese. So you just need a tiny number of them to leave to have an asymmetric negative impact on your tax take. So not only are you not going to get this 100 billion that they propose, that they think they're going to get, whether it's for good stuff or not, whether it's a good thing or not, it doesn't magically transform this mathematical logic. They are not going to get that 100 million. In fact, they're going to see a drop in the current annual tax take that California sees. So they're not going to get money for this new thing. In fact, they're going to lose money for what they already spent on. What's the natural progression? Well, they're going to do what Biden and Warren did. Biden called his billionaire tax for anybody worth 100 million. Well, last time I looked at the definition of billion, it had a couple more zeros on it. Elizabeth Warren's ultra-millionaire tax is 50 million. So you can reasonably expect that when they don't get the result here, they're going to double down to expand the group that this is going against. The other thing is this, they try to sell it. It's a one-time tax. Well, the income tax in the United States was a temporary tax to pay for World War I. It's now
1913, yes.
And so there's always going to be some good stuff to spend it on in the future. There's going to be an earthquake. There's going to be a wildfire. There's going to be this that we want to fund. There's going to be that we want to fund. And so my clients, and I think it was Palmer Luckey that said on X, what makes it a one-time tax? Because you say so? It's kind of a trust me, bro thing. So my clients, A, are assuming they're going to get the signatures necessary, and B, that it's not going to be one time.
David, we have so much to cover. A great question just came in, Xavier. I'm going to get to that in about 2 minutes. To my credit, of course, I'm not going to bring up all the times I was wrong. Years ago, I spoke about there will be a day, and it won't be that far in the future, where unrealized capital gains of the super rich will start to be taxed. Now, I can't say it's officially happened yet. There was words of that with Warren, with Biden's administration, and obviously much stronger now, at least for California. It's almost only a matter of time. And the stupidity, the key word is unrealized capital gains, which means I could pay a tax, in this example, on unrealized capital gains, and then I go to realize the gains, the stock or whatever it is went down, and I got a double whammy. It just makes no sense. And you hit the big one. I know many people are going to say it's the billionaires. Yes, I know Angelo kind of represents them, but I could still be a really successful entrepreneur and probably never have to worry about it. You don't think this is going to trickle down. You don't think that it's going to spread around the country. I got a blue wall behind me. I don't know why, but I don't know. I like blue, but the blue states are not doing so well fiscally, and there's no question they're going to look at this. Now, what happens when there's a brain drain? You mentioned some people going to Texas and Florida, some prominent names, Elon a couple of years before, that employ people, that build incredible companies, that support philanthropic endeavors. Like, there's a lot we could dive into here, David, and it just shows, unfortunately, how I felt a couple of years ago discussing these issues and mitigating risk for families, that we're in really trying times. I have one question that I think is a follow-up relative to 2026 midterms, Mamdani, and even 2028. But such a good question came in from Xavier that beat me to the punch by about 30 minutes. And I'm going to ask it. The conversations around taxing unrealized capital gains, coupled, and we'll get to Maduro, Venezuela, and maybe I heard wrong, but I don't know, gold from him and assets in Switzerland being frozen to be returned to the people, which may end up being the right call. My only question, could it go through some level of due process? I don't like the idea a couple of years ago of the US seizing the oligarchs' money. I don't like this idea. Are some of these bad people? Yes, but let it go through a level of process first. I am an extreme freedom advocate. I don't like using the power of the US and the dollar from this perspective, bullying other countries and basically freezing out access to resources from people. Now, I know they may be really bad. I understand that. I still don't like it. Maybe I'm wrong, David. You can impart your opinion, or like you're better than me at just simply telling the facts.
Well, there's a huge question here, and it is, if we put it back into, would you rather let one bad person escape justice but put to death, an innocent? Would you rather let 10 bad people escape justice, or have one innocent person put to death? And the presumption has been in Western culture, in the rule of law, is that no, you would rather let some bad people go rather than harm innocent people. So it's an innocent until proven guilty. Likewise, this is bad money until this is bad money until proven innocent, reverses that, and again just kind of sticks against the way I maybe was trained as a lawyer, or just generally the society that I was brought up in. That it is done, and I get, with the speed of movement of assets, these are decisions that can take, you want to move. If you're going to freeze the assets, you need to do it quickly, but it's a question of, are you going to freeze the assets? And in today's world, it was very difficult in places like Switzerland. And if people don't feel they have the rule of law available to them, then they take the rule of law into themselves. Hence the movement into crypto. Hence the movement into, precious metals and diamonds and things that people can have physical control over. If we look at what the response of Americans when FDR, restricted gold holdings, all of a sudden you saw expansions internationally. So it's always going to be a response. And I get it. It's completely understandable. In fact, it kind of aligns with my personal belief and training that money, just as people, should be innocent until proven guilty. And if guilty, properly punished according to the law. If you're found to have those are proceeds of corruption or proceeds of crime or terrorism, etc. But it has to go through the process of doing that. It shouldn't be presumed to be that until you can prove it's innocent,
Now, I
which
know some people
unfortunately
would
is a lot
say
of
we have
what's going on.
various federal and civil state forfeitures here in the US. And we're not going to dive deeply into this. It's a deeper discussion on sovereign risk that you're taking away the resources of people to properly defend themselves,
Absolutely.
even if they're pretty obviously 99% guilty. And you gave a great analogy of, yeah, I understand how you're going to feel that way, but once you go down this road, uh, you're hurting one person in the immediate that you want to hurt because they're probably a bad person, but you're really long term, you're impacting many, many others, including those that may, let's go with the word, be innocent. I think a follow up question, and again, we have so many subjects to cover. Uh, we are not that far later this year from the midterms. My God, how they come up so quick. And I don't mean to make it left and right. I grew up a Democrat, and there's many Democrats who I respect, and I'm open-minded. I'm not tied down by one ideology. But the Democrats have elected to go extremely, some would say woke, some say it pulled back a little bit, but the pendulum swinging with Mamdani, the rise of AOC, Gavin Newsom, it is extremely far left in my perspective. You could debate me. However, poly markets are probably going to say that the Republicans are in trouble come November. Now we have a long way to go. I don't know. Maybe Trump does something amazing in tariffs on something with the IRS, on people getting stimulus checks. I'm not saying I agree with that, but people do vote sometimes with their pocketbook. There are lots of things that can happen. But as of now, it does look a little challenging. Therefore, if I'm concerned about taxation, every form of taxation, a state, what we mentioned with the wealth tax, unrealized capital gains, income taxes, the rise of socialism, specifically in one specific party, is going to focus on quote unquote tax the rich, the rich, the rich. And that definition of the rich becomes way less than a billionaire. It might even be someone who makes 100, 150,000. Therefore, how do you help your entrepreneurs, your families? And I know I'm trickling this down below family offices to understand some of the nuances at play here relative to looking at the upcoming midterms.
So one of the things is I'm a Canadian. I'm not an American. I grew up in Windsor, looking, at the United States. I'm not saying I'm de Tocqueville, but I've been watching the American experience my whole life. I probably spent more hours than is healthy watching Ken Burns documentaries. I rode a
Baseball one was good.
8% in U.S. history and undergraduate into law school. So, but I don't have a dog in the political fight in the U.S. So, I was once told by somebody that I look at the world like Mr. Spock from Star Trek. My kids gave me a little squawk. And she was trying to insinuate that I didn't have any emotion. I took it as untrue, but aspirational, that I look at the world as it is, not how I wish it was and how I think it's going to be, not how I wish it was going to be. One of my clients called me Lesperance. And so when we look at, you may not like particular policies of the current administration, and that may have you vote one way or another. But if again, on the odds, I don't know what's going to happen in the midterms. I don't know what's going to happen it's a wildfire. It's called a wildfire for a reason. The political winds are blowing it all over the place. So I tell my clients, what would you put the odds that the Democrats are going to hit the trifecta in majorities in both houses in the presidency in November of 2028? given the political volatility right now, it is not zero. So if that happens, you may particularly like certain policies that the Democrats bring in, but you have to know that the ranking members in the Senate are going to be Elizabeth Warren and Ron Wyden, and you got to know who's going to be in the Ways and Means Committee at the House. That's going to be Ro Khanna, AOC, and Dan Goldman.
We are in trouble, folks.
Well, and what will they do? Well, just look at their websites to see what they're going to do. And so I have clients who are saying, not only am I going to get fire insurance and a fire escape plan to move from California because of the immediate risk of this wealth tax, I'm looking further afield. I'm looking down beyond the road. Now, we can execute with the help of family offices a move from California to Florida that's defendable in a couple of weeks. In order to get you out of the US tax system, that is a bigger lift. There are more things that we need to do. You need to have another citizenship if you don't already have them. I have clients say, oh, I've got an Irish grandmother. Well, it's not like you dial 1-800-I-AM-IRISH and the leprechaun delivers the passport to you. There's a process. Do you have the documentation? That file is going to sit on somebody's desk in Dublin. You're eventually going to get that. That takes time. I was just before the holidays traveling and negotiating on behalf of some clients citizenships by merit in Europe. They may not live in those countries, but as an EU citizen, they've got a number of different choices. They can go and live flat fee in Switzerland or in Italy or in Greece, or those are lump sums, or a remittance basis in Ireland or Malta or Cyprus. Lots of choices. They can move to New Zealand. There's no capital gain. There's a number of different places and choices that they can move to in a fire escape plan. But you need to have the fire insurance of an alternative citizenship to leave the US tax system. And you need to have a fire escape plan, which again, you can sell at the breakfast table because tax percentage income, divorce is a percentage of capital. So it's got to be a plan that you can live. So that's the bigger risk that now the clients who are awakened to the immediate risk in California are sitting back and going, oh yeah, that's less than 3 years away. That's a lot more things I need to do, not only in getting citizenship, but in reorganizing my, there is an existing section of the code, section 877A, which is an exit tax upon expatriation. And so, is that constitutional? Again, we haven't had SCOTUS opine on that. The Moore case, which people may remember from last year, was not exactly on point, and Justice Kavanaugh avoided making a direct decision on that. So, taxation of unrealized capital gains right now sits there. There was a potential constitutional challenge to that with Roger Ver had brought up that. Unfortunately, for those of us who wanted a legal determination of that, Roger Ver, who's crypto Jesus, or Bitcoin Jesus, I guess, he made an agreement with the DOJ and the IRS and agreed to pay a fine and things, and dropped his case. So we still don't know. And so clients are preparing for that possibility. And again, for the wealthier clients, and you don't need to be, again, Elizabeth Warren's talking 50 million plus. So for the clients, oh, I'm not a billionaire, I'm only worth 100 million. You're already in her sights. And if she gets it passed, all of a sudden, maybe it's going to be 25 million is considered,
Well, I don't know, David. It may be 1 million less than whatever her net worth is. And I guess she's one of the world's greatest stock pickers. Her net worth is going up quite a bit.
Yeah. Well, I won't get into Nancy Pelosi's also, she's going to probably be replacing Jim Cramer pretty soon.
Well, that might be an improvement, but okay. Now I'm never going to have Jim on the show. Jim, you're awesome. I'm just kidding. Okay, I think we covered this topic pretty well.
Okay.
I will come back to the U.S. maybe halfway through the discussion. And I am a little bit of a Captain America. There are some massive advantages to the US. I'm going to give a comment in a second that may relate to one of them. And for international people that are looking for options and have their tax picture pretty well figured out, it might be an incredible option. So trust me, I'm going to try a level of fair and balance. My comment that I was going to make was be careful about the tail wagging the dog. You want to optimize for taxes. You don't want to spend every ounce of energy and focus only thinking about in the short term. What you want to really optimize for is survival of your legacy and your capital effectively across centuries, multiple generations. In today's world, maybe I got to knock that down to 20 or 30 years because AI is changing everything. So there are strategies you could do, especially before your stock or your wealth really takes off. There's certain strategies in private placement insurance and foundational work that you could do with foundations, even in the US, which is more onerous, that could be very beneficial. You have to plan. And by the way, you got to pre plan, which means it's going to take some time, energy, and capital. If you're a little early, you're a little early. You spend some time, energy, and capital. If you're too late, you may lose everything or a much greater amount. David said something similar more eloquently. I just wanted to put it to you in a little different way. Now, on a slightly aspirational note, David, and I do not mean this tongue in cheek, audience, there have been discussions by Trump, very light. Do I think it's going to happen? No. Is it worth us putting on the table and spending a couple of minutes to dissect? Yes. It's a little bit the opposite, to some degree, of the earlier part of our conversation at Kickstart today. Is it possible? Again, Trump has mentioned it. Could we abolish the IRS? Could we rely on tariffs, sales taxes, VAT, tax robots in the future? Think of other creative strategies. Now we have massive deficit. I get it. Wicked expenses. Trump is raising our military budget by a massive amount of money. I just don't see this happening. Now, this could bring us into a creative discussion on printing money, macroeconomics. Will it all matter if AI really takes off? Look at the US GDP the last 2 quarters. But I don't want to bog it down into an overly macro discussion. Sticking to the topic at hand, what do you think, David? 1913, the IRS was established. Practically every country has some variation of it. Do we really need it in today's world?
I'm going to give you the what I would like to have, and then I'm going to give you the Dr. Spock or Mr. Spock answer. So the current tax code, which is enormous, I think it's 76,000 pages, and then there's the regulations. Is a bit of if I get it right, the Rube Goldberg machine. It started off and it was created when the code was created, at the end of the First World War, the current version, and that's built on. It really was at a time when many people were employed. There were employees, source deductions were there. There was tariffs that were in place. This is, Smith-Hawley was increased that in a period of time, and it was applied against a small enough number of people where it was manageable by a tax collection agency, the IRS. Since that time, it's been used for everything from social changes to support new programs that came in the New Deal and GI bills, and we all know the history of the 20th century and into the 21st century. We've seen it evolve, and it is no longer fit for purpose. The U.S. never developed what a lot of other countries have, which is a federal sales tax or VAT tax, which is a slight variation on a sales tax. And so the problem, and so would the United States be much better with a VAT tax, which is a consumption tax and works its way through the whole supply chain, and apply it to both goods? And the other thing is, now a lot of revenue is from services, intangibles, as opposed to widgets, intangibles. Yes, I absolutely agree that that would be a much better model. And now, Mr. Spock steps in. The reality in today's world is there are so many people, entities, corporations, individuals, lobby groups who have particular benefits from some element of the current system that it's going to be a lot of headwinds to make that happen. It was pretty dramatic, what Trump did with tariffs, but I just, I won't get into taco or whatever, but it's difficult to manage. There have always been tariffs of a sort, but this was using it in a completely different manner, and so I think he's going to have a lot of difficulties. We're soon going to find out whether he has the power to do it unilaterally or whether that is a congressional power. That'll be a Scottish decision that we're all anxiously waiting for. But I think it was a valiant attempt, but I think the headwinds may just prove too strong. So I agree it would be a great thing to have happen, but in the current environment, I just don't see it actually happening, even though I may would like it to happen.
I mean, that's a very logical Dr. Spock perspective. I do agree. Talk about massive headwinds, deep state, lobbying groups, every accountant, a state attorney. And as we learned a little bit with Doge, sometimes things have good intentions and kind of quietly fade away and disappear. There might even be more nefarious things that I'll refuse to mention. Oh, this is wishful thinking, David. Maybe one day. And the fact that I was teased with it gets me a little bit excited, but probably taken from me. Oh, well, let's move on. I promised I would come back a little bit indirectly to some US things that are maybe arguably slightly more positive than what I mentioned, probably a little sooner than I thought. I don't think this is a core part of our discussion. We have much to talk about, from Venezuela, Greenland, Europe, US and China, which be a little bit more geopolitical, but we'll try to ream it back into sovereign issues and why families should be concerned. And even talk about some one-off countries from Paraguay to Italy. So folks, we have a lot of things, but a little bit on the US. So the world, for the most part, it's not as strong as it was 10 years ago. And Trump is looking to strengthen it. And I could argue stablecoins were a brilliant idea to do that. And that is, the world effectively settles in dollars. And the US will defend that militarily, discreetly, sometimes not so discreetly. That's yes, we have massive debt. It's terrible. But we have way more than that in assets here in the US. And the world does settle in dollars. The president, and Trump, has been very good at printing money. He has no problem with that, apparently. So there's lots of things on the horizon, but I look at the US military, I look at our energy reserves below the ground, our level of minerals and resources, the outreach, apparently, of our military and others, probably the greatest farmland in the world in various parts of the US, rule of law, Silicon Valley. Well, the rule of law is breaking down a little bit. David, I hear you. You're a Canadian, you're living in Europe, and I see many challenges here in the US. Trust me, look at the rise of some of the politicians that you're noting. But we have some huge advantages. I didn't even get into oceans on each side, relatively friendly neighbors to the north and south, and no offense, but neither of them are specifically a military threat to the US. Uh, there's a lot of positive here in the US, which is why a lot of the world's wealthy that don't need to be on CRS, we'll get to that a little bit later, coming here to the US, setting up structures, private trust companies. The US does have some things, if you mitigate your tax exposure, that are very, very attractive to people, David.
No, absolutely. So if your audience will allow me to pardon my French, but I tell clients, look, we have to separate your ass from your assets. So you may very well like having assets in the United States. You may very well like having a US dollars. There is no CRS, common reporting standard, in the US. There's obviously would be no FATCA. You can set up wonderful things like private trust companies. You can have US dollars. You can hedge across a number of currencies. One of the, again, ideal things I try to do for clients is, whether we're looking at your ass where you are a resident, you can do all of those things without being a US person for tax purposes. I can invest in Apple without being a US person. I can have assets in the United States without being subject to CRS or taxation in another jurisdiction. So there are I can invest in American companies which have done fabulously well. I can be bearish or bullish on the US dollar. I can hedge it against other currencies. The question is, what other currencies do you hedge against? Is it the euro, Swiss franc? I happen to be, but I'm not a Forex trader. Personally, I happen to be a little bearish personally. But again, I'm not a Forex trader, so no investment advice here. But I put a lot more right now in Swiss francs.
Agreed.
And things. So my revenue is in US dollars and euros, but what will it be 2 years from now? I don't know. I take all my risk in my business. For my broker, it's basically, here's my money, don't lose it. Hedge it against currency and don't try to press me by tripling the NASDAQ. But that's my own personal philosophy. But the US has some wonderful things. Again, I've spent my entire life being a close observer of the U.S. There's some great things and some not so great things. So what I try to do with clients is, in organizing their ass and their assets, how do we arbitrage the good things about a jurisdiction and avoid the bad things about a jurisdiction? So, for example, I want to do business in the U.S. I want to go visit the United States. Fine, you can do those things, but we can do them with a strategy where you are not you're not exposing your global wealth to the United States. So the idea, for example, of what was originally called the Trump card, which is now called the Platinum card, made sense. I act on behalf of clients. I did an evaluation of that from a market point of view when it first was proposed. And there were a number of target markets that were proposed. And again, I act on behalf of the target market. I don't act on behalf of Howard Lutnick or the United States. So I said, as an employer, there's 5 different ways that I can do that without spending $1 million. In fact, there's a number of different ways I can meet my HR requirements without paying $100,000 in the H-1B form. So that market is not there. Foreigners who want access to the United States and green card, there's already the EB-5. So if you're Trump card, which is a donation, the EB-5 is an investment. So which one is kind of the better one? So what's the advantage? The only advantage the gold card could have would be if they made it faster in getting there. But again, I can bridge you with other L1s and other non-immigrant. I can get you into the United States if you want to be physically. So it's got to be better than the existing deal we have. What was attractive was, okay, you can have status to say 100% of the time in the US, but not be a US person for tax purposes. Okay, well, that was kind of attractive, but who would it be attractive to? If you're a wealthy foreigner who's never been a US person, again, I can get you up to 6 months in the US without becoming a US person. If you want to spend a given year there, I can have you'll be a US person under the day count for that year. And if you don't trigger any income or capital gain, it's a non-event. Okay, so you got to have a better deal than we've got right now. And I said, the market that it would be attractive to is those who expatriate, the Americans who cease to be Americans. They then take all their assets out of the United States. They then come back into the United States. They don't have to overcome their life inertia. Life is very familiar. They just don't have a US passport anymore, but they have their full life in the United States. The latest version of the Platinum card, I don't know if somebody was reading my analysis, but they excluded that market. So there isn't a market. Now, the reality is, despite claims that they've sold 1.3 billion of them, they've never passed the necessary immigration, let alone the tax code changes for that. So it's not there. So there are some good things the U.S. government is doing. They just announced today a complete freeze for 75 different countries on immigration processing. And the reason that was given for that is they wanted to stop people who were going to come in and go on welfare. Okay, well, that's a potential drain on the economy. But what you've done by just saying all nationals, what you've done is also exclude all the economics. So the EB5, foreign direct investment, the E2 that's doing investment, the L1s, which are senior intercorporate transferees, you've stopped them. So you have lost a specific economic benefit in an attempt to possibly stop welfare fraud. Or welfare, or people draining on welfare. Well, have you thrown the baby out with the bathwater? Time will tell. So the United Kingdom did the same thing. They had a golden visa program, which was called the Tier 1. And they said, well, some bad people got in on that, and they were pointing kind of to the early Russian oligarchs. I won't name any names because I don't want to slap suit against me. But and they said, oh, there were bad apples that got into the barrel. Well, that was because they weren't doing proper screening in the early days. They changed all that in 2016. But later on in 2023, they closed 23, they closed the program saying, oh, and they pointed on the bad apples. Well, you fixed that problem 8 years before and things. And now I've got people who want to come into the United Kingdom, Americans, for example, but we haven't got a clear path. So they're again exploring bringing in a proper path. So countries, I co-authored a book, and we're just about to launch a new version of it called Flight of the Golden Geese that I wrote with a London School of Economics professor emeritus, where we said how the 1% affect the 99%. You may be jealous of them, but when you've got revenue models for your countries and let alone philanthropy and job creation and capital and entrepreneurial spirit, which is dependent upon that 1% to fuel your country moving forward, you bring in policies that are not only don't attract them, but actually scare them away at your own peril. It's the march of folly.
That's quite a bit there, David. And some in the audience have noted, and it's David would be fluid enough in this, but we could be 4 hours. I will have other discussions relative with a Tom Handler, Josh Becker, and other prominent U.S. estate attorneys with a global flair in terms of, as a U.S. citizen, from an estate and asset protection perspective, what to do onshore, and absolutely what you should be doing offshore, and why Nevis, Cook Islands, potentially, although I'm getting a little concerned, assets held in Switzerland, Bitcoin, gold, various structures are that's a subject for a different time, somewhat interrelated to the things we're talking about, but I have to keep it relatively condensed at 2 hours. I will add, some of these things will be discussed in instant response simulations live in Miami on January 26th. If you're a family or a family office and don't yet know about what I'm doing there, simply reach out to me, assuming you're not watching this after the fact. But this is going to be a subject we're going to have a big focus on this year, so there will be others. Uh, and I would state that Puerto Rico, for a U.S. citizen, I would state South Dakota, for a variety of various trust perspectives, especially dynastic, are very, very powerful tools, including a private trust company. But again, maybe a subject for a bit of a different day. David, I think the CRS thing is kind of important, and many may not be familiar with it. So this will also relate to you commenting on FACTA. So if I had to give a comment, the US forces every foreign bank to report Americans' accounts or effectively get cut off from the dollar system. But US banks and institutions, like we noted, do not report foreigners' accounts back to their government because the US, thank God, never joined the Common Reporting Standard, known as the CRS. We're not the only country. I think Paraguay, who we'll get to, Philippines, Dominican Republic, Venezuela, Egypt, and others. But a lot of countries, including Switzerland and Singapore, countries that you hail as incredible fortitude for wealth and resources, they report everything back to your quote unquote domicile country. David, I'm going to give the floor to you to give us more context.
Sure. So let's look at a little bit of the evolution. So in the late 1990s, the U.S. got tired of negotiating with places like Switzerland and saying, "Oh, we want to know about all our Americans with their secret bank accounts." And Switzerland said, "Well, what are you going to do? Give us tariffs relief on chocolate and cuckoo clocks? No, we're not interested." Then they discovered or realized, hey, we have the world's reserve currency here, and hey, we've got 30 to 40% of the world's equity markets here, that every financial institution around the world, so your UBSs, your Credit Suisses, your Pictets, your Royal Banks of Canada, your ANZs, they all want access to US dollar correspondent banking accounts, and they all want access to the US markets for all of their clients. So they brought in something called the qualified intermediary regime, which said, you, the institution, will sign with us, the Treasury, an agreement that you're going to review all your existing clients and all your new clients, and you're going to identify U.S. persons, which are citizens, green card holders, or people who spend too much time. The citizens are the easy ones. Green cards, it's a little, but let's stick with American taxpayers. And they imposed that. Well, a couple of the banks, the first one to discover it was UBS, thought, well, we're going to not do this. And a gentleman named Brad Birkenfeld said, well, I have a list of all these people, and he won a record-winning whistleblower award. The U.S. government then said whether they used it as an excuse or because they were upset, brought in kind of the QI regime on steroids, which we know as FATCA. And FATCA then imposed, again, a much more stringent and they closed down some banks and banks paid huge settlements, and they said, we don't want to do this again. What's the new acronym? F around and find out. Well, they found out. And these banks, then they brought in FATCA. Well, all of a sudden, this forced banks to go through. They went from the old microfiche to computerization to let's find the American tuna in the net, but they were sweeping the whole net. So all of a sudden, other jurisdictions, Canadians and the Brits and the Dutch and the Australians said, oh, can you give us our dolphins that you've swept in here? But the problem is, I'm a Canadian, for example. The Canadian government would know if I have a bank account, if I'm living abroad, but I'm not a Canadian taxpayer. So they'd have the information, but it's useless because I'm not a Canadian taxpayer. So that's CRS, but there are a number of reasons why people want to completely valid, again, on that innocent until proven guilty. Information is private until you show a particular reason why a government or an individual or an organization or a journalist is entitled to it. A number of countries but not all countries signed on to the Common Reporting Standard. What's the power of FATCA versus CRS? Well, the US got Russia to agree to, and I'll say why it was Russia and not a Russian bank in a moment, to agree to release that information. This was at the time when Putin went into Crimea. So if the United States had that kind of power to do that against that, do you think there's going to be some bank in some small country, small town? Why did they have to get Russia? Well, there's privacy laws in different jurisdictions that prevent banks sometimes from giving things directly, for example, in Canada. So the agreement that they had was the banks would give the information to their local Canadian CRA in Canada, and CRA would then, in an intergovernmental agreement, give that information to the United States. So that was the way that the United States got the information while complying with local privacy laws. The United States did not sign on to CRS for in multiple both Democratic and Republican administrations never signed on to CRS, which meant that now, while it's very difficult for impossible for an American to find a bank or brokerage house, I mean, we could open up David and Angelo's bait tackle and bank trust company, but are you going to trust David and Angelo? Any bank or financial institution you would want to deal with is going to be subject to FATCA, and no matter how wealthy you are, they are going to give you up in a moment because you're just not worth it compared to the fine. But for CRS, the United States takes in a lot of foreign direct investment into the United States for the simple reason that, if you are a South American, for example, it's not really the tax authorities you're worried about. It's you don't want people to know that you've got money because all of a sudden, magically, you are going to get a ransom note for that exact amount. Same thing in China, where the government ransoms you with exit bans. And now, I've had some Chinese clients who the Chinese government got that information about their foreign bank account not through CRS, but through spying, and who were nicely told, we want you to make a contribution here to the tax authorities for this specific amount. I had a client say they quoted my exact amount in my account in Singapore. So.
Wow. And yes, I know the CRS gets a little dry for some of you, but it's very important to understand, and an advantage that the US does not report. Another subject we could get deep into in banking, but David, 2 hours I could do 6 hours with you, and maybe some of the audience would like that too. But in keeping things going, I'm going to turn some attention to Europe. Now, my audience knows I have sometimes been critical. And there are some positives. I love to go there. I love parts of the culture, the food, the fact that generally people are in better shape and more aware of their health. There are huge advantages. I do understand that. There are things, though, that I find very, very frustrating from an American looking in, maybe ignorance, you could say that. And David, I think, being someone who's from North America, has lived in Europe for many years, is very fluid in the issues that we're talking about, from sovereign to lifestyle to tax, is the perfect person. And I think we're going to have some disagreements. But David, let's see where it goes. I'm going to start with a country that you mentioned several times a little earlier in our conversation. One that at one time was, well, the sun never set on a UK or a British empire or dynasty. And I look at the UK now, and to me, a lack of unifying culture and morality. Now, I get it. As an American, I'm so used to liberties and freedoms. I could effectively say what I want to say. There's no way that I could do that in the UK. Actually, I think, well, I'm not a big enough person, but in theory, like, I'd probably be arrested. I could do a retweet of something that seems so innocent. And the perspective of how I see how the UK has changed since I first went there and over the last 20 years, I'm shocked. So when you say earlier on when we were comparing it with California and the challenges of both. Oh, UK, don't worry. Angelo has no interest in going there to live. That doesn't mean there's not great people I don't want to visit. I would rather live in California. Better weather, better food, and I'm in American territory where somewhat I could say what I want to say and have personal freedoms. I am disgusted. So I'm going to use a little stronger words of what I see happening in the UK. I think they're going to have a more balanced approach than me, but why don't we start there? Then we'll move to some other countries.
Well, as an initial comment, when we talk about Europe, there is in Brussels, there is a European Union that does have some rules that are across Europe, but that would be a relatively minor number. So you have different jurisdictions within Europe which will have different rules on everything from banking to taxation to citizenship to all kinds of different things. So Europe is got some commonality, but lots of variation. So I don't, if you've got any British listeners here, whether we call the UK post-Brexit Europe or not, let's include it in, this side of the Atlantic. And the United Kingdom certainly has a number of different governments that have changed. Currently, the Labour government is bringing in certain rules, particularly you mentioned on freedom of speech, that are different. And you have to understand that there isn't in the United States, you have a written constitution.
I understand.
In Britain, the constitutional rules are a collection of decisions and legislations that have been made and constantly varying. So there isn't a First Amendment, for example, equivalent if we're talking about freedom of speech. So that is something that is varying.
And that's hard for me as an American to wrap my arms around, but I do have to be respectful. Each country has different rules, so I do understand that.
And Canada, after Justin Trudeau's father, Pierre, brought in the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, has kind of a hybrid of the two. We have effectively what would be a Bill of Rights, and we also have a common law constitution. And so there are different jurisdictions. Some people like it, some people hate it. It's similar.
I would hate it.
It ends up being an individual choice. So, for example, during the pandemic, let's use New Zealand, for example. New Zealand decided they were going to basically lock themselves away from the world. You only could go in if you were a New Zealand citizen or you had a legal immigration status. And it effectively worked because it's an island in the middle of the Pacific. So you couldn't do that in, for example, a United States. Even if you agreed with that policy, you couldn't do that in a country with borders and a huge amount of people kind of going in and out. It's a small population that was good. What they didn't do is, and so I had a client that went to New Zealand. It was one of my Silicon Valley clients that was a Lord of the Rings fan and had gotten residence for him. And he bugged out there and he said, "Oh, this is great. I can go to a rugby game. I'm not wearing a mask. I'm sitting in outdoor cafes having a beer, and this is great." Some people, hated that. So it's all a preference. They felt it very restrictive that you had certain rules. The right to bear arms is got different rules in different places. So there are places that I personally wouldn't live in, and there are places which other people love. And so I'm going through this right now for Poland. We happen to like. It was a green Christmas and a white New Year's. But we're the Lesperance family are moving abroad. We look at, okay, what are our specific needs? I have 11-year-old twins, so I'm going to be somewhere where, I can get an international baccalaureate program. We're getting a little tired of seasons. We want something a little more, Mediterranean or tropical. I have to think about where I am with regards to time zones and clients. Lifestyle, cost of living, all those things. So we've looked at Madeira in Portuguese territory. We looked at Cascais, which is a place just outside of Lisbon. We looked at Bermuda. We looked at Tulum, Mexico. We're off to Koh Samui in Thailand in a few days. Working at Buenos Aires as another jurisdiction, all of which, are things that are possibilities for us, but may not be appropriate for other people. So the United Kingdom is attractive to some of my clients because they like some of those restrictions that you don't like. They
I don't get it.
They're going to buy the homes for my non-doms who left at a discount. They want to be in an English-speaking place, so they won't go to another country where the population doesn't all speak English. They like theater. They like certain things. It is, I will say, not a majority of my clients, and I probably take a lot more people out of the United Kingdom than that want to come in.
And they should be members of my SFO continuity, my private membership group, of course. I'm going to stay on that a little bit, go in a little different direction, and back to what we spoke about a little while ago. New York with Mamdani, a charismatic politician, I'll give him that, completely despise his policies. Socialism never works. Reminds me a little bit of London from maybe 15, 20 or so years ago, with some of the politicians you mentioned before of tremendous rise in the Democratic Party. Their socialism and the Mamdani playbook has kind of worked. Now, it worked for New York, meaning to win an election, but New York is going to skew to that political bent anyway. So a little misleading, but nonetheless, a rise of quote unquote socialism. Now, I get it. You probably don't want to be a specific commentator or geopolitical strategist, but I'm going to throw you a little bit into that. And the next country we're going to bring up after this is going to be Spain. That's also going to be a little bit of my crosshairs. Not the countries you mentioned, but let's not dive overly too deep into that. We don't have time to go over everything. Now, when I mention this, oh, Angelo, but I hear you, and I think you're partially right, but how about Norway? Well, okay, let's go talk about Norway. Norway is a homogenous country. Norway has 5 million people. Greater LA has 15 million. It's a tiny, homogenous country. Oh, and how could I forget? Incredible oil reserves, sovereign fund. I don't know if on paper, technically, everyone is theoretically a millionaire, but kind of. It's very, very unique. You're singling it out. Oh, and by the way, where's the innovation? Where's the entrepreneurs? Those that are there will usually come to America. It's a slow death. It may be a nice slow death. Now, again, is Norway going to fit into what you're talking about in sovereign work you do with families? It might, because it's very high taxes. So why not? We'll throw broadly, if you wanted to comment on the rise of socialism, how New York is a little comparable to London from a couple of decades ago, and why people bring up Norway when the reality is, I think I defended as to why that's very misleading and really not optimistic to the long term for a variety of reasons.
So Norway has seen an exodus because they brought in a wealth.
Thank you.
And again, that liquidity thing that we were talking about with regards to California, a lot of entrepreneurs said, it's a private company. It's not like there are people lining up to write me a check so that I can, sign it over to the tax authorities. I have to leave because I just cannot afford to pay this tax from a practical viewpoint. And so that a lot of them left. I live in a port city in Poland, so we have daily vessels that come from Sweden and Norway right here that land about 2 kilometers away from me here. So we get a lot of that traffic, and so a lot of the people in shipping and mining that do not need to be in a specific location to make and maintain their wealth, they've left. It's just like like Larry Page and Sergey Brin do not need to be in California to, make and maintain their wealth in Alphabet. It's not like they're, swinging into the office in Palo Alto every day and checking over people's, software. Likewise, these people, own shipping and mining and all, various things. They don't need to be there. So that's where you saw a big movement. So John Fredrickson, for example, was a wealthy Norwegian that went to the UK. When the UK became unattractive, he's now moved to Switzerland. And so what is Switzerland? Why would Switzerland and Italy and give a better deal? Well, these are lump sum jurisdictions. So let's look at it's, canton to canton varies slightly. But Italy, for example, they just upped it to 300,000 euros. Well, 300,000 euros, whether, the taxpayer I moved there or the person I moved there makes $1 or 300 billion. It's 300 million. It becomes a line item. They don't have to worry about, whether this dinner is deductible. They don't have to worry about, depreciation. They don't have to worry about, is Price Waterhouse, when they hand me this giant thing, I don't have to pay Price Waterhouse. I just have to, not that anybody writes checks, but I just have to send them 300,000 every year. I don't have to, when they hand them this thing going, I hope you got this right, and worry about, compliance anxiety. So why would Italy do it? Well, if Angela moves to Italy on a lump sum and pays 300,000 euros, that's the equivalent of about 20 normal Italians paying taxpayers. And there's no marginal cost to Italy to have Angela there. It's not like you have to pave another mile of road or hire another police officer. And guess what? Angela is going to, sit down and have his espresso and biscotti for breakfast and pay 23% VAT and employ people and do all these things. So there's no marginal cost. He's paying for 20 other people. This is a good deal. And so that's why Switzerland and Italy and Greece have gone for a lump sum. The UK for a couple of 100 years was bringing in more than their fair share of wealthy foreigners that were coming in and spending money in VAT and starting businesses and bringing capital when they had the remittance bases. They decided to close that because it was unfair to the locals. Well, guess what? All that money now gone. Well, they weren't paying their fair share, just like the California billionaires aren't paying their fair share. Again, the most kind of famous example was the wife of the former Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, Ms. Murthy. Well, in her last year before she was on the remittance basis, she paid 6.2 million pounds in tax. She's not paying that anymore. The Nick Stronsky is the head of Revolut, young guy. He picked up and moved to Dubai. They've killed that. Now family offices are actually moving out of the United Kingdom. So all those employees are moving out. When you move out of the United Kingdom, I've got, as their advisor, I'm telling them, look, that money you used to give to UK philanthropies, don't do that anymore. Give it somewhere else. If you love cancer research, now you're giving it to some other organization than a UK cancer organization. So they're not contributing tax. They're not putting capital into businesses. They're not spending money. They're not doing philanthropy, all because they thought, oh, this is unfair. Okay, I guess you've reduced inequality because you've now brought down everybody to an even lower, good job, but you haven't got money to pay for government services to fulfill all these promises that you've made to the voters.
David, there's probably about 10 countries. Maybe we'll go a little round robin. The first two, we'll maybe give a little bit of extra love, 90 seconds or so each. And the other ones, I think we can move through quickly. I still want to get to Canada, Venezuela, Greenland. So there still is multiple subjects to cover. I did promise I would come back to Spain. Partially, indirectly, some of my cultural heritage, amazing country, beautiful, great food. But I don't know. They control the amount of money I could take out of banks, massive capital controls, a socialistic country. Marabella, beautiful, so sunny, so awesome. The government is in debt, bleeding entrepreneurs, a socialistic country. Yeah, I guess what? They're part of the EU. So, but they really got debt, not prosperity. They lost, in my opinion, monetary sovereignty. So again, this goes back to me, a little bit of an issue with Brussels and socialism. And I know it sounds like I'm throwing Spain under the bus. I'm assuming you probably don't have a truckload of rich, successful people that you're looking to get into Spanish citizenship, but I might be wrong.
Well, they can get citizenship, but they don't have to live in Spain. So the citizenship, because the U.S. is fairly unique, whether you think it's a good thing or not, of having citizenship-based taxation, with all due respect to the few Eritreans that actually pay a relatively small fee should they actually want to do something in Eritrea. So the U.S. is the only one with citizenship-based taxation. They own it. In fact, we're one of the few countries which say if you have an immigration status, in the U.S. they call it a green card or resident alien status, you're a U.S. person, you're automatically a taxpayer. Everybody else says if you spend a certain number of days in our territory or you have closer connections to our territory than somewhere else, you're a taxpayer. So you can get Spanish citizenship and go and live in Italy on a lump sum, or go live in Malta on a remittance basis, because you've got that right. So that's one of the benefits. Now, people moving into Spain as a place to live, you're right, it's beautiful. It's Mediterranean, Barcelona is a fabulous city and all those things. But you can visit there, not spend more than 6 months there, enjoy all the benefits, arbitrage, get all the benefits of Spain without having the bad things, the currency controls, the taxation, etc. So getting Spanish citizenship is actually a great thing. Becoming a Spanish tax resident is not. Just like, investing in the United States and spending time there is a great thing. Becoming a U.S. person for tax purposes, again, maybe not.
And that does lead into a country you briefly brought up and just mentioned a couple of seconds ago. That's intriguing. This one a little bit more directly of my cultural heritage, and that would be Italy, because they have that, 200 euros, 200K euros flat tax.
Now 300 as of New Year's Day.
Well, if you're super rich, you could afford that. Obviously, beautiful, great food, lifestyle. I could argue, we won't get too deep into this one, depending on where you are. Not too far from Switzerland, which is interesting if you're a multi-billionaire. There's a variety of reasons we won't dive overly deep into at the moment, but I could also talk, and I think some positive things with their prime minister compared to some other European countries, debatable. But I could also look at, 150% debt to GDP, fragile banks stuck in the euro, zero growth for decades. So there's a lot of problems there too.
Well, so the lump sum amount is the one that gets a lot of press, but there are also Italy has a number of different tax favorable regimes. For example, yes, if you live in the southern part of Italy, or in Sicily or Sardinia, you could have as low as an 8% effective tax. If you don't like Italian banks, well, you don't need to have your money in an Italian bank. You don't need to have it in euros. You can. So, for example, I generate income in euros and US dollars. Poland has a lump sum. It's 300,000 zloty, which is about 65,000 US. Whether I make $1 or 10 million, that's my cost. There isn't a compliance. It's a nice country. There are things we like about it, things we don't like about it, but we arbitrage different jurisdictions as to what works best. So again, where you do business and where your assets are, whether that's a bank or in a certain currency, doesn't necessarily need to be where you are. Now, and I have people that look at a number of different jurisdictions. I have young children. I don't have the patience to do homeschooling and nor the patience to employ tutors. So I'm going to be somewhere 8 or 9 months of the year while my kids are in school. Depending on where people are, if they're single or empty nesters or don't have children, depending on what stage in their life they don't need to be somewhere for 9 months of the year. So they can basically, either if they have to be tax resident in a jurisdiction, they can do that. That's a function of what their citizenship are. But if you're an American who's given up US citizenship, you're not required to become tax resident somewhere else. You may choose to from a lifestyle point of view because you don't like running around, but you could easily, as an expatriate American, spend a couple months in Italy, spend a couple months, in Australia, spend a couple months in the United States and not be subject to tax anywhere, have your money in investments or in asset classes that you like, not have reporting requirements, not have taxation requirements. So you arbitrage, enjoy all the good things without any, and avoided the negative things.
And David, if I could mention a couple of countries and we could go rapid fire on them. You mentioned one of them that you're potentially looking at, and that would be a beautiful country as well. Again, Europe has many awesome things that I so enjoy. It's the politics, the taxes, depending on other perspectives. Portugal. So give us the quick going round robin, good and bad in 60, 90 seconds.
So Portugal has a coalition government, as many European countries do. It is now dominated by the socialists, but they need to kind of pull in together. It was sold. They sold a lot of these golden visas.
They sure did.
As a lot. However, the processing. So one of the things is. I do not take commissions from third parties, from countries or fund managers or from property developers in Greece. So I am unconflicted and agnostic. In fact, if there is a commission paid, I flow it back to the client. So in Portugal, a lot of people were sold these golden visas, and the government specifically brought in a policy where they delayed, and so now it's up to 4 years. 3 or 4 years to process that golden visa application. They've also moved the naturalization period from 5 to 10 years. So again, there's a number of different, I look at all the different options and things. It's a beautiful country. If you're we loved Madeira. We didn't end up deciding on that place because it's an island in the Pacific or in the Atlantic. And during the pandemic, they literally closed the airport. And it's not like, Bermuda, you can actually get to New York by boat. You're not going to Africa or Portugal by boat easily from Madeira. And so we decided, no, we didn't want that. Cascais, the Portuguese changed the tax system. They had something called the non-habitual tax regime, which was fairly favorable to us. They changed some rules on there. It wasn't as favorable. I don't mind paying some taxes. I pay taxes now, but what I think is quite reasonable for police and some of the services that they have. But I am no longer willing to live in a jurisdiction which says your premium to live here will rise based on your income, but your benefits will not. One of the things in Canada, people say, "Oh, we got free healthcare." No, you don't have free healthcare. You pay a premium every April 30th, and that
exactly.
premium is depending on what your income is, but the level of your services don't. Poland has a national health service, which I could very well use. They also have private healthcare coverage, which I take advantage of because I like having a little app and making appointments and seeing doctors. That afternoon.
David, keeping you and I to probably 60, 90 seconds is almost impossible, but I'm trying. France. I could go into what, a 60% inheritance tax, but who am I? Good and bad.
France, we are waiting to see whether they'll bring in a budget. I'm doing a webinar with a French tax lawyer where we're looking at Switzerland as a potential jurisdiction. France is a beautiful place. You may want to have, a beautiful year or whatever the Russell Crowe movie was, on a winery and all very nice. There, you can live there under the current rules. You can mitigate some of the taxes. The problem I have in France is, despite my last name, which is Lesperance, which is the hope, is I don't have much hope for the stability. It is politically, it is, throw a bunch of weasels in a bag. I mean, they can't agree on, sun rises in the east and sets in the west. So I don't think that's a very stable place. And I have a lot more people French leaving than I have people who are going in. So kind of like Spain, kind of like the UK.
Basically says it all. Switzerland has been covered so much. We'll do more on it, including with David. Even a little bit of other areas in Central Europe, including Germany. Why don't I switch to, now it's a little unique from a citizenship perspective, but overall maybe more residency, but I'll allow you a freedom on it. And that would be Monaco, or at least as long as France allows it to exist. But I'll let you talk.
Great place if you're not French. Particular lifestyle. I had a lot of clients. We looked at. I did when labor came in. I did a webinar, which I'm doing an updated version of later this spring, called "We're Out of Here," where I looked at 17 different jurisdictions. And my first question to my Brits was, okay, what would sell at the breakfast table? Monaco is very expensive. You basically live in flats. It is you better like CCTV because every inch of the place is monitored. I happen to have a couple of F1 drivers as clients, but you go a little nuts with the noise during race week. I go to Monaco, at least once a year for the yacht show. Nice place, but I wouldn't. It's not on the Lesperance family list, but some people love it. It does not have tax treaties, which is an interesting thing. For example, if you want to spend more time in another jurisdiction that has a day count, you want to rely on a tax treaty to get over the normal day count to rebut that presumption you're a taxpayer. In contrast, for example, to the UAE, which quite cleverly did sign tax treaties with a number of different jurisdictions. So you've got those tiebreaker rules. So Monaco, again, for the specific people who like Monaco and who are going to not spend a lot of time in another taxing jurisdiction, it works. Again, not for everybody.
Now, I have to bring up, for my good friend who's hopefully listening, Alexander Galambos, a wonderful family office liaison in the wonderful country of Austria, the last European country I visited not that long ago. I had incredible Wiener Schnitzel, great apple strudel, met incredible people. They were so kind to me, and wonderful old families, some of them that go back literally 500 to 700 years, that I learned so much from. So I got nothing bad to say, but I don't know about it enough from a tax perspective, or AKA the super rich and the good and bad. It's very central. That's good. What would be your synopsis of Austria?
Vienna is one of my favorite cities.
Understand.
Having a Sachertorte, going to the museums and the Hofburg palaces and watching the horses do incredible things. It is also an interesting country with regards to citizenship. For lineage citizenship in particular, I have a lot of Jewish clients, some of whom lost relatives in the Holocaust. So both Austria and Germany had programs for descendants of those who lost their lives or their citizenships as a result of Nazism. It is a country from a tax point of view, which is quite civilized. It's more expensive than the lump sums, again, for ultra high net worth clients. But it's a beautiful country to live in. And so again, I have some clients that love it. I have lots more clients that love visiting it, but not being tax resident there.
Understandable. A country you did mention before, so we kind of covered it, but maybe give a quick synopsis. It's beautiful. It's isolated. It's away from the fray. Supposedly among the safest countries, God forbid, nuclear war, and that would be New Zealand.
I like New Zealand, but you have to recognize it is an island in the middle of the Pacific. It is a 14-hour flight from LAX. Mm-hmm. You kind of don't go to Sydney for the weekend. It's which is a good thing and a bad thing. The lifestyle is very kind of laid back. As you never say to a Canadian and call them an American, you never say to a Kiwi that they're an Aussie. There is a wonderful investor visa, and I have a lot of clients that are now getting it as an insurance policy. Basically, you do an asset reallocation, the equivalent of either 3 or 6 million USD. You take some vacations there, and you can get permanent residence, never becoming tax resident, never spending another day in New Zealand after you get that permanent residence. So for ultra high net worth clients, it's quite popular to get as an insurance policy should the event occur and you want to bug out there. I have some clients, for example, I have Israeli tech founders who have decided they do not want to raise their children in a war zone. Where can they go that is the exact, as far away from that conflict as possible? And True. They're moving to Auckland because there's a very vibrant Jewish community in Auckland. So again, very specific for each family.
And Beautiful. David, a country out of the blue, it's in Latin America. I think it has about the lowest buy-in to citizenship as I can imagine. It's not reporting to the CRS. I look at that as being a positive, but I'm sure it has some challenges, and that would be Paraguay.
Yeah, Paraguay and Uruguay are two countries that we look at a lot for stability. For if you're setting up some family offices, I just did kind of a survey of the different countries for a client for establishing a family office. They ended up opting for Uruguay. It's very stable, good lifestyle. It is also for the person who kind of wants to lay down and have a residence with minimal physical presence and get a Mercosur country citizenship. It is also a good option for that. Uruguay is also kind of an up and coming. Argentina, which is on the Lesperance list of potential countries. Buenos Aires, beautiful place.
I remember you said Buenos Aires. Yes.
Yeah. If you make money outside of Argentina and you make it in a non-Argentinian currency, you can live quite well playing the tax key, very tax efficient, and by playing the exchange game, you can live a very nice life at a very reasonable price. And again, which could be a good thing or a bad thing, like Australia, it's a long flight. For my in-laws to come and visit their grandkids, that's a 14-hour flight from Frankfurt. So, but you can do it on a Dreamliner.
And a little bit of a unique question on Asia from a little different, putting on your crystal ball or opening up your crystal ball. Hong Kong, Singapore, Malaysia. Which Asian center do you think for the super rich over the next 25 years would be the play?
Singapore. Mr. No Man is an Island set up. It is a very efficient place. I had a niece that went to university, was offered a scholarship and went to university in Singapore. I have a lot of clients. I first started doing clients in my law school business partner went and worked for Baker McKenzie in Hong Kong. Again, this was this is in 1990, so prior to the handover. So I've been dealing with Asia clients, Hong Kong, China, Asia clients for 3.5 decades. Singapore works very well. As a place to live, it is tropical. So you need to deal with that. Some people love it, some people do not. But as a stable place, Singapore it has a very effective government, relatively low corruption, very stable rule of law. Malaysia has had its, 1MB, there is a level of corruption there. Hong Kong, I am very bearish at with regards to, Hong Kong is not, is effectively no longer a special administrative region. It is effectively run by Beijing. It has some different rules, but it is, thoroughly under the, 2047 happened in 2020.
And still a fair amount to cover, David. One question did come in asking about effectively U.S. and Israeli quote unquote citizenship, talking about, I think, what Israeli 10-year tax deferral, and then has a part two. But let's start with that from an Israel perspective.
I have a lot of Israeli tech founders. A lot of them would have met during their time in the IDF. We had so many of them, this is prior to October 7th, that were looking to move to the US, and I did a 2-part series for Bloomberg Tax on the tax and immigration strategies of tech founders moving into the US. Israel does have, for Israelis under the law of, or Jews under the law of return, and actually non-Jews can go in also. There's a very favorable tax holiday regime. There is an exit tax if you're an Israeli moving out of Israel, but it's not. There's some planning that you can do on that. It's a very vibrant entrepreneurial country. It is, it's the geopolitical risk and lifestyles. Again, some people are very attracted to it. Some people, like the couple who are moving to Auckland, are not. It is definitely that startup nation entrepreneurial vibe is definitely there, and the tax regime. It is not citizenship-based taxation like the United States. It is a residence-based taxation system.
And if I read directly the question, it talked about dual U.S. and Israeli. Henceforth, although you have the fluidity of the Israeli passport and more freedoms in Israel, you're still tied into the U.S. tax system, correct?
Yes, you'll be an American living abroad. So anybody who's interested, on my website, there's actually a white paper that I did on, no matter whether you're moving to Israel or Canada or Portugal or Singapore, you're an American, you have ongoing U.S. tax liability and financial reporting liability, financial banking reports, PFICs, all those good things. All that stuff is covered in the white paper for those who are interested. And so you will have, again, you'll have foreign tax credits and different things. Again, all that's covered there. But effectively, your global tax rate will remain the same. Of course, you won't have a state level of tax because you're no longer resident in a taxing state. So I've had clients, for example, that move from New York, where you have both city, state, and federal tax, move to Israel, and their total effective tax rate dropped because they no longer had the city surtax and the state level tax.
Of course. Their part two, I mean, we've covered this so much before, which is why I didn't even ask about United Arab Emirates. We discussed it last year. And again, if we do everything, we're going to be here for 4 hours. We probably got about 20 minutes. But he did ask, pick Pick one that you would like, maybe whether it's a US person expatriating, a second option as a passport, or even a European. You mentioned you were looking at it, and that would be one country in the Caribbean. He mentioned St. Lucia and Anguilla.
So we were looking at Bermuda, which is a British overseas territory. It's also not effectively the Caribbean, so it has a certain different climate. The other thing that attracted us to it is the housing. If you've been to Bermuda, you've got these white stone roofs and stuff. If there's a hurricane that hits in a lot of the Caribbean islands, you pull out the FEMA tents. When a Category 4 hits Bermuda, you call the landscaper because some of the shrubberies blew away. The place is built like a tank. So we liked that. St. Lucia, again, very gross generalization here, so my apologies in advance to anybody of Caribbean descent. But basically, the Caribbean is one of two things. They're either sandbars or the tops of volcanoes. So St. Lucia is, a beautiful place. And it is, very hilly and mountainous and stuff. It is really starting to develop. It is in the hurricane path, which you don't, for example, get in Barbados or the ABC Islands. And so it's again a beautiful place. I have a client of mine who is was a big gaming person that has moved there and loves the place.
And switching over a little bit to your country of birth. Now, when I think of it, I still think a couple of years ago of the trucker protest, of freezing bank and crypto accounts and threatening family members and others that wanted to help. Yes, the transition to Mark Carney, former central banker, now PM, and you hinted at it relative to a little bit of a hybrid between a little more of the US and the UK system. There are many aspects. Canada's a huge country, incredible natural resources. Again, so much beauty and so much great culture of their own, but underlying just very different than what I'm used to being an American from, again, what I would define as a little bit of my liberties, my freedoms, and a culture to me that has went far left, far woke. I'm not even sure they had a little swing back, but there's elements of Canada. If I was an American, well, I am an American citizen. It's a neighbor. It has vast wilderness where I could be isolated, especially in the West. I would still consider it, shockingly to people, as if I have multiple passports. Maybe it should. If I'm an American and I want easy access to another country, that might make my play. So I'm giving you a little bit of a long-winded question, one that may hit closer to home, given your background and heritage. Why don't I wind you up and let you go on Canada, David?
Okay. So again, like New Zealand, some people like aspects of things in Canada, some people don't. So assuming you like Canada, it does have the advantage for Americans of you can move to places where it's relatively easy to get to and people to get to you. You can stay in your same time zone, etc. It is very familiar to you with regards to culture and lifestyle, from McDonald's to, Sam's Clubs to whatever. The main problem I have with Canada right now is the immigration. Even if you want to go there, the immigration system is completely mucked up. And you could say that was, and certainly I would agree with you, that was based on government policies which were not economically driven. So there's it's an enormous backlog with regards to refugees, students, poorly skilled workers that they allowed in. There wasn't a large border where you had a large population that were coming, for example, on the southern border of the United States. So, but they were let people fly in on fairly dubious, from an economic point of view, and that system is completely jammed up to the point where clients, immigrants, they would want to get into into Canada, entrepreneurs, investment, etc., can't get in. They had something called a startup visa program.
Mhm.
I had an American client wanted to move to Canada, set up a business, employed several million. When he applied, the processing time was 12 months. He had to pay because they brought in a special tax because he was a non-resident. He had to pay, almost 700,000 US in this extra tax. But he thought, well, the rules are if I get permanent residence in 3 years, when it's 12-month processing time, I get that refunded. So, okay, there's a, cost value of money there, but that's fine. With the processing, he still hasn't got permanent residence. That processing time right now, according to the website, is 10 years. So I would love people to come to Canada and contribute to the tax base and employ my extended family and do those things. Unfortunately, as a agnostic advisor right now, Canada is just not workable.
I probably should have brought this one up when we were talking about the benefits of coming into America, whether as a citizen or green card or not. And again, there are massive advantages. Trust me. There are strategies, and we don't want to make it a deep tax and estate planning focus. That would be a little bit of a different direction and also take multiple hours. But there's variations. Some call them drop-off trust. Let's use a Brazilian billionaire, $500 million, creates a foreign trust before moving to Miami, structures private placement life insurance before moving to Miami. In other words, there are strategies where you could have a little bit of the best of both worlds. Now, again, I don't want to make it an ultra deep estate strategy discussion, but it does play into our conversation. I should have brought it up earlier. Comments?
Yeah, you mentioned in passing a few times Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico has an insurance structure for private play, PPLI, does have some distinct advantages. It's kind of half in, half out. The
Yes.
good half is in, and the bad stuff you're out. For wealthy foreigners coming into the United States, I have people that I'm gonna, what can I do to get a green card? And I said, well, let's stop back here. What are we trying to accomplish here? Well, I want my kids to go to school in the United States. I want them to, start their careers in finance or whatever, and to start, expand our business into the United States. Great. So we'll get the kids in, we'll get them green cards and status, a number of different pathways to that. What do you, matriarch and patriarch, want? Well, we want access to the United States. We want to visit our children and hopefully our grandchildren at some point. We want to, be able to enjoy, visiting various places, but we don't want to expose the family wealth here. Okay, then fine. What we'll do is we'll get green cards for the children. We will get you non-immigrant visas. You own a company, we'll create a U.S. subsidiary, we'll get you here on an intercorporate transfer. You could, from an immigration point of view, stay in the United States 100% of the time. If you choose to spend less than 100% of the time, you don't become a U.S. taxpayer. If on a given year, let's say you have your grandchild has special needs and you want to kind of hang around with them a little more, or, there's a health issue or just a preference. Again, as I mentioned earlier, so long as you may be a U.S. person, but if you don't trigger any income or capital gain, that's going to be effectively a nil return to the U.S. So there's a bunch of different strategies that you can do to, again, it's understanding what's the client goals and what's each family member's goals, and putting together that. Now, there are a number of things that you also want to deal with, which is, you mentioned kind of in passing, asset protection. The threat is usually not some stranger that slips in your pool or on your sidewalk. It is usually a future ex-daughter or son-in-law or an ex-spouse. I have 11-year-old twins. Statistically, one of them is going to get divorced. I bet on my daughter because she already thinks the bad boys are cute. So there's two conversations she could have in the future. One is, honey, we're getting married in 2 weeks. I need you to go get independent legal advice from this lawyer. Or, honey, it didn't work out. I know you expect half. Unfortunately, that SOB father of mine put it into a trust when I was 6 years old, so you get half of nothing. And so that's where, again, you want to be able to look at moving the assets out. Then you supplement it with but the key is you have a structure so that just the pot of gold is completely unavailable to the potential litigant.
Okay, David, we're probably going to run a little bit later, but I'll try to be concise in our, let's call it our final 15 minutes. I do have to cover a subject. I believe it made my title. I shouldn't have waited this long, and it may get a little edgy, and that's Venezuela, because it's not really going to perfectly relate to a discussion of, I want to move there. Although, hey, you never know. It probably is a little more geopolitical and may get a little sensitive. So I look at it from the perspective of Trump kind of maintaining the Monroe Doctrine, going back to one of our former presidents, that this is our hemisphere, and past presidents have let it lax a little too much. And influence from the only other world power, China, has gotten too strong. And we could talk about oil. We could talk about rare earths and the impact on AI, which absolutely is going to be incredibly impactful. So at the end of the day, after my commentary, Maduro was effectively extracted by the US, grabbing a sitting head of state of a relatively small to mid-sized country. And this brings up the bigger picture. You could throw in your personal opinion, people you talk to around the world, non-US. What does this mean for sovereignty? Is there really any such thing anymore when someone like Trump, who could be a little bombastic, a little maybe not overly calm in thinking things through, and I'm not saying right or wrong, I'm skewing to it may have been the correct decision, but sovereignty, what does it really mean in a world when we're going to have central bank digital currencies, likely, when someone could be extracted like that and assets could be frozen? And look at what we mentioned earlier with the Canadian truck drivers. So I'm throwing a complexity of a question at you that involves Venezuela, the Western Hemisphere, and what does that word sovereignty really mean in the world moving forward?
There's a number of geopolitical issues that arise as a result of that, from now Greenland to other places to NATO, etc. I tend to look at these things because I am I'm a little more attuned with the sovereign individual. How do I, as an individual who's arbitraging for my assets, different jurisdictions and things? There are some great things about the U.S., and there are some things that are not so great. So if I look at it from a political issue, to me, the oil idea, going in for the oil doesn't make much financial sense to me. I think it is more of exerting power in the United States, for the U.S. exerting power and in its sphere of influence. If it withdraws from the rest of the world, I think that is actually not a show of strength as opposed to weakness, but it may show, if they continue in the rest of the world and show extraordinary power in their sphere of influence, the Monroe or Donroe Doctrine, that'll have certain implications. If we look at Guyana, is kind of like oil, is kind of like Texas, sweet and light. Venezuela is kind of like the tar sands in Canada, which is heavy, mucky, requires a lot of work in order to get it usable. The infrastructure, it's a very interesting rollout as to what's going to happen. It is a country which was Maduro was at the head of effectively a number of different, probably a better analogy would be kind of um, boss of bosses, but he doesn't control all the five families. In fact, every little area has these collectivas that are, if that's, I may have butchered the name of that, but they're basically local controls. So, um, you know, I think what it did do is show a power strength. It also is denying the Chinese oil from that
Yes.
source. The Chinese are getting oil. So if you look at kind of where are they getting oil from? They're getting oil from Venezuela, Iran, and Russia. So now, Iranian oil is, there is a choke point that you can stop Iranian oil from getting from Iran out to to China. For Russia, there is, there is again shipping point. But you're going to have to spend a lot of money, which Russia doesn't have, which China does have in building a pipeline. But there's always, people forget there is a rivalry between Russia and China. If you know your history with regards to Siberia, the Chinese consider that Chinese territory, and the Russians, the Tsar took that. So it's definitely, may you live in interesting times, which has which really shakes up the world. My particular focus with my clients is avoiding the second Chinese curse, which is may you come to the attention of the emperor. So how do you, as an individual, with you and your family, with your assets, protect your wealth and well-being, your family wealth and well-being? It's since we've been on there, the Danish and prime minister has been sitting. So we don't know what the outcome of that is. Was that going to be a similar meeting like Zelensky last year? Is that going to be a meeting like Netanyahu? We'll find out when we get off this presentation.
Yeah, that's coming up in a second. Brief commentary we'll get from you as we take it effectively to the home stretch. I did kind of want to go over, we're going to put it on the cutting room floor till next time, the OECD, Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, a little bit of, some would say, a globalist tax cartel, but we'll save that for a discussion for a different time. There was just so much to discuss with David at the moment as we begin now to take it to a home stretch. I'm going to look if any more questions came in from our live audience. And since you did bring up Greenland, I'll briefly bring it up as well. Again, I'm assuming you being non-American, being based in Europe, that they're aghast over someone like Trump. I could argue I understand. He is brash. He runs on emotions. He's not a unifier. But that doesn't mean that some of the intriguing policies, or haven't been intriguing, from tariffs to others to securing our borders, have not been good for Americans. Again, I'm trying to take politics out of it, but I do understand traveling the world. Unlike many Americans, he's probably not overly looked on too favorably. That doesn't mean that they're right, by the way. And that's going to be an important part of my next comment. I get it. It looks a little bit exerting power, you said, with Greenland, him claiming it's valuable for not only rare earths, etc., but really for global positioning against, quote unquote, and he'll throw in the West enemies, and that the US taking control over it would be good, quote unquote, for Western countries. I'm assuming there would be an offer made to the citizens to make them wealthier, for lack of a better word. And maybe the days of the Danish, that is no longer really helpful in the world order that we have now. Now, this could get into a deeper conversation about the WEF, about Brussels broadly from a European perspective. And again, I'm wickedly disappointed in everything in that direction that I noted. So I'm not going to say whether I think on the surface it's right or wrong. I do think it's intriguing to consider, but why don't you give me the global perspective? Thank you.
Okay. So let's look at the term rare earths. Rare earths doesn't mean like diamonds that they occur rarely in the world. What they mean is that you can take a chunk of dirt in the United States. It's just very difficult to extract it, and there is a great ecological cost in that extraction. China cornered the market on rare earths because they very early on recognized that it was important, and they were willing to pay the environmental price to do that. Going in rare earths in the Ukraine, you're in a war zone that adds a difficulty and cost to doing that extraction. In Greenland, that rare earth is under a bunch of ice in very harsh conditions. Again, extraordinarily, you'd much rather be in a nice temperate environment in Kansas and doing that. So it makes no sense going after it from a rare earth point of view. From a military point of view, there are certainly Russian submarines. I'm sure they're there. The United States is already bordering with Russia in Alaska. With the opening of with the warming, there will be opening up in the Arctic will become much more important, and so having bases there, the old wire system, across northern Canada, et cetera, to show early detections of ballistic missiles is kind of been replaced by lower orbit satellites, so that is not there. But it is important to have, I think, from a military point of view, in protecting the homeland of America, that they have a strengthened military presence there, and whether it's the Danes or an independent Greenland, that can be negotiated, and things. So, to me, the only reason that would make that it would happen is because Donald Trump wants to, have this equivalent of the Louisiana Purchase or Seward's Folly, the purchase of Alaska, and he wants to, the United States expanded its territory, and I did that. Stamping, is that willing to, at what price? Because it will have an impact on NATO and some other things. So what price for that? To me, it comes down to, if it's for military purposes, we're willing to do the military expansion and presence in the United States, and there are some, I think, valid reasons to have that, especially with the opening of the Northwest Passage that will be happening with nuclear-powered icebreakers and just generally the thinning of the ice, and things. So I don't get the logical. So Mr. Spock doesn't get the logical argument for it, but for the emotional reason, and as you mentioned, he does some things that for emotional and not particularly logical reasons. What will happen in Greenland? I don't know, and things. So. And at what price to do that with regards to NATO? Stephen Miller's right. Nobody's going to fight it, so you're not going to actually have to spend a lot of blood and treasure to invade it. But what price are you going to? What value is there to the United States with regards to the downfall of NATO? I was traveling through a lot of the smaller NATO countries earlier, just before the holidays, visiting, and they are now, and Canada is also guilty of that. They relied way too long on, the United States will pay for it. We don't need to put some of our money to our national defense. That is drastically changing. And Poland is certainly changing. Poland already spends 5% of its GDP because they're basically on the front line. But other countries, I was going through all the Croatia and Slovenia and all these countries are now spending increasingly large amounts of their GDP, so that's a good thing. But I think that was so the tactics to get the NATO partners, and including Canada, absolutely to kind of pay the proper tithe. It was a good thing with that Trump 1.0 and 2.0 has done. I think, though, the collapse of NATO will be a detriment to the United States collective security. But
all very good points. Could also, some people make the argument, maybe we don't want certain countries in Europe and others to get more military might and power and flexing their muscle, that maybe we do like to be the quote unquote police of the world. Good or bad, I'm just throwing it out there. What I will note a little bit on that, given some of my focus on issues around sovereignty, geopolitics, and some level of military fluidity, and the work that I'm doing around AI, is militarily, things are changing rapidly. Space tech, drones, bioweaponry. What worked as a military in the past, AKA even 5 years ago, is very different moving forward. But again, a subject we could dive deeper into in the future, but one that we like to think about in our podcast and my organization, covering subjects that are deemed to be somewhat sensitive. I'm not saying I have the answers. I have more questions than answers, and I'm wrong a lot. But I'm not afraid to bring up the discussion and bring in wonderful thinkers and thought leaders within the privacy of my group and the confines of my membership to go over tough things like this and what some solutions could be. Two final, very quick questions came in from the audience, and they're much lighter than the last two subjects. One of them would be, effectively, what do you think of a digital nomad visa?
Very useful bridge document. One of the good things that came out of the pandemic for the countries, you have to prove no criminal, that you've got medical coverage, and that you've got a certain level of money. So again, there's no burden, there's no marginal cost to having it. You've got long-term tourists that used to spend a lot of money to try to get, spending money in your restaurants and employing little people. We use the digital nomads quite a bit as bridge documents. So even though you may have that entitlement to the Irish or the Italian or the Polish or whatever lineage citizenship, those take time to process. And for Americans right now, or any actually non-European resident or citizen or visa holder, you're restricted to being in Schengen, think continental Europe, for 90 days every 6 months. And the controls, they have entries and exit controls. It's quite serious. So if it's everything from I want to get on a bicycle and bicycle around, Spain and Portugal and France for 4 months, well, you can't do that as an American, but you may get a digital nomad visa. You don't need to be in this country for a specific period of time, so you can choose whether you want to be tax resident or not. Gives you access there. Wonderful kind of bridge document, no investment requirement, like a golden visa.
And lastly, we might have brought it up last time about a year ago, the uniqueness of a country in Europe like Estonia.
Estonia, interesting country. Their kind of unique selling proposition was that they computerized a lot of the government process. They brought in something called e-residence, which is allowed you to have a government documentation it didn't give you the right to live in Estonia. It didn't give you a pathway to citizenship, but it was a very useful document for those who had poor travel documents or it was difficult to have documents. There are a number of other, Nauru, for example, brought in a similar type of e-residence program. It is European in the sense that they are increasing with regards to the tax and reporting requirements. So doing a company is very efficient, but is it tax efficient? Very efficient to set up and maintain, but it's now getting into a question of whether it's tax efficient. So again, you need professional advice, and you need to make sure comparing it, what's usefulness for knee residents. Very cheap, very easy to get, assuming no criminal background. But from setting up corporations and things, there's a reason that's the guys who started Skype and Revolut left.
That is true. David, we had a great 2+ hours. You're an incredible guest. I'm so appreciative of you sharing your incredible knowledge and creativity in your thinking and global perspective on sovereignty, taxes, and other with our audience. For those that would like to learn more about you online, any subscriptions, newsletters, or directly ways they could reach out, how could they learn more?
Well, they can go to my website, which is Lesperance Associates, same spelling as my last name. Both my personal and firm LinkedIn, I post quite frequently and on a variety of things that are happening. That's a good follow. On my website, you can subscribe to my blog. I have a number of white papers on there. I'm very frequently quoted in the media. My wife said that I finally arrived because I was in the New York Post recently.
She is correct, of course.
But she told me if I ever appear on page 6, then I can soon be one of the departed. Really LinkedIn and subscribe on the blog on the website, and do roam around. You'll find quite a bit. I mentioned some white papers that I think are quite interesting for a lot of clients, especially Americans.
Appreciate you, David. And for those of you that did ask, how does David spell his last name? It's Lesperance. That's David Lesperance. David, it's been incredible as always. I'll give a brief, by Angelo standards, a brief close. First of all, it was great having David on. I'm just curious. I learned so much from him. And thank you all for your great questions as well. This is there's several subjects I'm just really deep into within the world of great wealth and family offices: geopolitics, macroeconomics, and investing. Broadly circling back, not just to single family offices, but sovereignty, being someone who does believe in freedoms and my perspective, and having libertarian perspective and views. I think the importance of what is mine, what I've worked for, the ability to mitigate taxes, but having fluidity and optionality in terms of multiple countries and being strategic in my thoughts and the decisions I make. I mentioned earlier, don't overly optimize for taxes. It is important, but think bigger picture, which could relate to governance and family and other perspectives with the country you're aligned in. What single points of risk and exposures do you have? Not just in countries and banks, investments, in private companies. And things change so rapidly. At the end of the day, governments have the ultimate power and control over military and finance, economics of the country, bad decisions that lead to inflation. There's so many different things that even as a billionaire, you effectively have zero control over. You have control over your thoughts, the decisions that you make, and the optionality that you have. My views, and somewhat bringing in David, may take some of your time and energy and may cost you some money initially. Is it going to make you sleep better at night? Is it going to be better for the security of your family over generations? And effectively, isn't that what is worth it? And missing that and getting that wrong, like most will, could mean effectively that you lose everything. So this is a subject that's dear to my heart. For my members, I have a 700+ page PowerPoint style handbook that will be ready in mid-February called Sovereign Risk and Disaster Preparedness. It comes from a consulting assignment I did years ago that has evolved a lot for a very prominent family. So whether you're US based or not, these are things that need to be top of mind. You're not getting this at other family office organizations, at least not with the level of connectivity, obsession, and passion, and level of resources. And even, as I mentioned, this January 26th in Miami at the Ritz, my family office day program will cover this subject and everything around it. March 16th, that whole week in Palm Beach, will also be very dedicated to this. So along with my handbook, upcoming digital masterclasses and videos that are going to accompany it are going to be very important to understanding ways to address sovereign risk and disaster preparedness. David mentioned many of them today: fluidity, optionality, understanding geopolitics, developing relationships, banking, cultural relationships, maybe governmental. But it also goes deeper than that and deeper beyond owning gold in Switzerland, although very important, I could argue, and Bitcoin, much deeper. And some of those secrets are saved for my members and those that participate in my programs. Go to angelorobles.com and simply become a member, learn more. Right now, this first quarter is just such an active time for me for a variety of perspectives. I think you will get simply incredible value. So go to angelorobles.com. We have capacity for some more members. We appreciate you, but I hope you enjoy my content like today. I enjoyed the conversation greatly with David. Look at me as a friend in the community. Reach out to me. Email is angelo@angelorobles.com. And like David, I'm active on LinkedIn and most social platforms. Reach out. Hopefully, I provide content that some of you find intriguing. I appreciate all of you. Thank you. And again, thank you, David Lesperance, for, as always, being a great guest. Have a great day.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.